Welcome to Silent Screams, where nightmares come to life. Get ready to step into a world of darkness, chilling whispers, and terrifying secrets waiting to be uncovered. Here, silence isn't peace, it's the prelude to your worst fears. Are you ready to face the depths of your darkest nightmares? Stay tuned for stories you'll never forget. Story 1, The Spire of Flesh. Nestled in the heart of Appalachia was the small, unassuming town of Elridge. Known for its dense forests and a single, now abandoned research facility, the town was wiped from maps and records following an incident in the late 1970s. Officially, it was labeled a toxic spill, but whispers of survivors tell a different story, a story of bodies twisted beyond recognition and a sickness that was alive. Decades later, curiosity led a group of urban explorers to Elridge. Among them was Claire, a journalist with a penchant for uncovering dark truths. The deeper she delved into the town's eerie history, the more she realized this wasn't a place abandoned by chance. It was erased for a reason. Claire and her team, John, a tech-savvy conspiracy theorist, and Mia, a skeptical biologist, arrived at the outskirts of Elridge on a fog-drenched evening. The forest seemed unnaturally quiet, as though the wildlife itself avoided the area. As they walked through the overgrown streets, they found the town frozen in time. Cars rusted in place, homes sat eerily intact, and old flyers fluttered in the faint breeze. John discovered a local newspaper on a diner counter, dated June 18, 1978, with the ominous headline, "Quarantine declared, stay indoors." Their destination was the research facility. It was the source of the rumors, and Claire hoped it held the key to understanding what had happened. The group entered the facility, its metal doors creaking like a dying animal. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of mildew and something else coppery and sharp. John's flashlight landed on a mural of grotesque, spiraling shapes painted in crimson. Beneath it, words were scrawled in jagged handwriting, "We became what we feared." Deeper in the lab, Mia uncovered test records detailing experiments involving accelerated genetic mutations. "They were trying to create something," she whispered. "But it went out of control." As they ventured deeper, Claire noticed the wall seemed to ripple under the beam of her flashlight. Dismissing it as fatigue, she pressed on. But when John stopped to inspect a strange, fleshy growth on the floor, the truth became undeniable. The substance twitched. John recoiled as the growth pulsed, expanding outward in a grotesque, sinewy bloom. Tendrils lashed out, forcing the group to retreat. "It's alive!" Mia screamed, slamming the door shut behind them. Their panic deepened when they realized the growth wasn't confined to one area. The walls, ceilings, and floors were alive, pulsating like a single, horrific organism. The facility itself had become infected. Mia theorized that the mutations were spreading through the DNA of anything it touched, rewriting biology at a terrifying speed. As they navigated the labyrinthine halls, they encountered evidence of the past, skeletons fused with walls, human figures grotesquely morphed into organic machinery, their faces frozen in expressions of eternal agony. In the lab's main chamber, they discovered a survivor, or what was left of one. A mass of flesh and eyes stared back at them from the corner, its misshapen mouth gurgling in a pitiful attempt to speak. "It hurts," it wheezed, as tendrils extended from its torso, reaching for Claire. She stepped back, horrified, as the entity convulsed and disintegrated into a puddle of writhing tissue. The group realized that the mutations were not just physical, they were psychological. Whatever this organism was, it fed on fear, guilt, and despair. The deeper they ventured, the more the group succumbed to the facility's influence. John began hearing whispers in the walls, pleading for help. Mia's skin developed a strange rash that pulsed like veins. At the heart of the facility, they found the spire, a colossal column of flesh and bone, pulsating with a sickly red light. It stretched from the ground to the ceiling, alive with constant motion. As the group approached, Claire felt a strange pull. The whispers grew louder, coherent now. Join us. Be free of fear. Be one. Mia collapsed, her body convulsing as tendrils erupted from her skin, pulling her into the spire. John, overcome by madness, ran screaming into the darkness, his cries cut short by a wet, tearing sound. Claire, resisting the pull, uncovered a console nearby. The logs revealed the scientists' last attempt to stop the organism, a fail-safe explosion. But they hesitated, unwilling to die. Now, it was Claire's choice. Claire activated the fail-safe, setting a countdown. As the spire's tendrils reached for her, she ran, the facility collapsing behind her in a cacophony of roars and flesh-tearing screams. She escaped into the forest, but the mutations had marked her. Her skin bore tiny, pulsating veins, whispering promises in the night. Elridge was gone, but Claire knew the spire's call would never truly leave her. Months later, Claire's story was published, sparking a wave of curiosity about Elridge. Explorers flocked to the site, unknowingly carrying fragments of the infection back with them. The spire had spread, and the world was next. Story 2, The Mutation Experiment. The sound of the medical equipment echoed faintly in the dark, sterile room. It was an unsettling hum, one that blended with the steady rhythm of Dr. Vance's heart. As the lead geneticist at the Orvina Institute, he had worked on hundreds of experiments, but this one felt different. It felt wrong. Dr. Vance stood over the transparent containment chamber, his breath fogging up the glass as he peered inside. Within, a creature shifted restlessly, its body twitching unnaturally. Once, it had been human. Now, it was something else. It had started as a simple project, an effort to push the boundaries of genetic modification. What had been meant to be a breakthrough in medical science had devolved into something monstrous. The mutations had taken a life of their own, spiraling out of control, and Dr. Vance found himself standing at the precipice of his greatest failure. He had always believed that science could solve any problem, that it could transcend the boundaries of life itself. But now, as he stared into the creature's eyes, he felt a deep, unshakable fear. Whatever he had unlocked, it was far beyond human comprehension. And it wasn't just confined to the laboratory. The Orvina Institute had been built with a singular purpose, to create the perfect human specimen. But in the process, they had discovered something that no one had anticipated: the key to unlocking the potential for extreme physical and mental mutations. For years, they had experimented with altering DNA, pushing cells beyond their normal limitations. At first, the results were minor slight changes in strength, agility, and cognitive abilities. But with each successful experiment, the stakes grew higher. Dr. Vance had always believed that their work could cure diseases, extend human life, and push the limits of the human body. But he hadn't foreseen the consequences. It began with a subject known only as Patient 92. Initially, she had been a volunteer, a young woman with a terminal illness who was willing to undergo genetic modification in exchange for a chance at survival. Her body had been weak, deteriorating from the inside, but her spirit was strong. They promised her a new life. Instead, they created a nightmare. After the first injection, her body had rejected the modified DNA, leading to horrific transformations. Her skin had turned a translucent shade, veins twisting beneath it like dark rivers. Her eyes, once a soft brown, had become an eerie shade of silver, as if they reflected something ancient and otherworldly. The mutations didn't stop there. Her limbs grew longer, her bones hollowed and expanded. Her movements became jerky, unnatural, and when she screamed, it was as though the very walls of the institute reverberated with the sound of something primal, something furious. But it was her mind that fascinated Dr. Vance the most. Despite the grotesque transformations, her intelligence had increased exponentially. She became aware of the changes, of the pain. And as she learned to control her new form, The other subjects, those that had not survived the earlier trials, came to be seen as her children. The Institute's failure had turned into a perverse success. And with each new mutation, the creature, Patient 92, grew more powerful, more sentient. Days turned into weeks, and the strange happenings at Orvina became more frequent. Staff members began disappearing, leaving behind nothing but the faintest trace of their existence: broken lab equipment, spilled blood, and the echoes of screams. The mutations were no longer confined to Patient 92. As the creature's influence spread, more test subjects began to exhibit signs of strange, violent transformations. The mutations grew more chaotic. Some subjects lost control entirely, their bodies writhing uncontrollably as if they were caught in an eternal, agonizing rebirth. Others exhibited terrifying strength, their new forms far stronger than any human could ever be. The Institute had inadvertently created monsters, living, breathing weapons, with a twisted, horrific will of their own. Dr. Vance, once proud of his achievements, now found himself caught in a web of his own making. Desperation and guilt gnawed at him. He knew the solution. There was no saving the Institute or its research now. The only way to stop the creatures from spreading beyond the confines of the lab was to destroy the core, the heart of the mutation process. But how could he destroy something that had grown so vast, so powerful? He didn't have much time. Patient 92, now fully in control of her monstrous form, was getting smarter. She had learned to manipulate the others, to control their rage. What had once been a solitary experiment was now a full-blown army, a legion of mutated horrors waiting for the right moment to break free. Dr. Vance had never been a man to act on instinct, but something had changed. Maybe it was the fear, maybe it was the realization that he was no longer in control. But as he rushed through the dimly lit hallways of the Institute, the sound of footsteps pounding behind him was enough to make his heart race. Something was following him, he could feel it. He turned a corner and stumbled into the main control room. His hands shook as he accessed the terminal, desperately trying to initiate the emergency shutdown protocol. But the screen flickered, displaying a message he hadn't seen before. It's too late. The realization hit him with a sickening thud. The creature, Patient 92, had already accessed the system. She was aware. And she was in control. With a chilling screech, the door behind him slammed open. The air grew cold, and the shadows in the room seemed to stretch unnaturally. Through the door, a figure stepped forward, its face obscured by a veil of long, black hair. It was her. Patient 92. She had come. You thought you could control me, she said, her voice like a serpent's hiss, but now, we are free. The lights flickered again, and the room plunged into darkness. The darkness was oppressive. Dr. Vance's breath came in ragged gasps as he turned to face the creature. Patient 92 wasn't alone. Behind her, a horde of the mutated subjects had gathered, their eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. You've made a mistake, Dr. Vance whispered, his voice breaking. No, Patient 92 replied coldly. You made the mistake. We are the future. As she spoke, the creatures behind her began to move, their bodies twitching and shifting in ways that were both mesmerizing and terrifying. Dr. Vance backed toward the control panel, but his hands were too numb to press the right buttons. Panic rose within him. Please, he begged, his voice cracking. Please. Patient 92 laughed, the sound like broken glass. You don't understand, do you? We've evolved beyond your understanding. Beyond your control. Suddenly, the lights burst back on, revealing the full scope of the horror in front of him. The creature's twisted, broken versions of humanity had come together under her command. Their faces were unrecognizable, their bodies malformed, and yet, their eyes held a terrifying clarity. You created us, Patient 92 said, her voice now a low growl. And now we will spread, we will multiply. and soon, the world will know the true meaning of mutation. Dr. Vance's heart stopped. He had made a mistake. The mutation wasn't just physical, it had infected the very core of humanity's existence. And now, it was unstoppable. In the following weeks, reports began to emerge of strange occurrences in nearby towns, people disappearing without a trace, strange creatures lurking in the woods, and whispers of a new breed of humanity, one that was evolving beyond a natural order. The Orvina Institute, once a beacon of scientific achievement, had become a graveyard. The creatures, led by Patient 92, had escaped, and the world would never be the same again. And somewhere, in the dark corners of the earth, the mutation continued to spread. Unseen. Unstoppable. Story 3, The Malformed. It was supposed to be a routine mission, just a group of young scientists investigating an abandoned research facility deep in the forest. They had heard rumors of unsolved mysteries and untouched data left behind by the last team that had worked there. The facility had once been a state-of-the-art genetics research center, focused on mutation studies, but something had gone terribly wrong. Now, its broken walls and crumbling corridors were a shell of their former self. Dr. Karen Blake, a geneticist specializing in cellular mutations, led the team. Alongside her were Dr. Alex Reynolds, a microbiologist, and Emma, a cryptologist, who could decrypt the jumbled data they found on old hard drives. The team had arrived with high hopes, eager to uncover the truth behind the failed experiments that had forced the facility to shut down. The moment they entered the building, they felt it, the cold, oppressive air. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the soft creaking of the building settling into its decay. As they explored, they found lab notes and files scattered across desks, and on the walls, strange symbols and sketches of creatures they couldn't comprehend. One file caught Karen's eye: Experiment X. The notes were frenzied, detailing mutations far beyond anything they'd seen in the field. The deeper they went, the more they discovered pictures of grotesque creatures, some with too many eyes, others with limbs that should not have existed. Yet the most disturbing part was the realization that the researchers had been experimenting on themselves, altering their genetic makeup in a desperate attempt to evolve beyond human limitations. "We need to leave," Alex said, his voice trembling. This is too much." But Karen wasn't ready to give up. The questions were too tantalizing. "We have to know what happened here," she said, her voice resolute. They pressed on, unaware of the horrors that would soon unfold. By the third day, things started to feel off. At first, it was little things. The air seemed to thicken, like the building itself was alive, breathing in sync with their movements. The equipment, old and rusted, began to function in strange ways. Lights flickered, machines powered on by themselves, and faint whispers filled the air. But the real shift came when Karen felt it, something inside her body, a crawling sensation under her skin. At first, she brushed it off as stress, but soon it became undeniable. One night, after a long session of going through more files, Emma screamed in horror. She had seen something in the corner of her eye, a shadow moving unnaturally fast. It was the first time they encountered the mutated creatures, beasts that seemed to flicker in and out of existence, their bodies twisted beyond recognition. They had eyes where they shouldn't, limbs that bent in impossible directions. And the most disturbing part? They were once human. That was when Karen realized with a sickening certainty, the mutation had started. And it was affecting them, too. Days blurred together as the team tried to make sense of their situation. One by one, they began to experience strange symptoms. Alex complained of sharp pains in his chest, while Emma's eyesight deteriorated, and she began hearing whispers that weren't there. Karen couldn't escape the feeling that something was crawling beneath her skin. But it wasn't just physical changes. Their minds, too, were starting to break. Karen found herself drawn to the journals left behind by the original researchers. The deeper she read, the more it became clear, the mutations had been a deliberate attempt to push the boundaries of human biology. But something had gone wrong. Instead of evolving into a higher form, the creatures had become mindless, monstrous beings, part animal, part human, part something else entirely. Then, late one night, Karen started hearing a voice in her head. Soft at first, like a whisper, urging her to embrace the mutation. Join us, Karen. Become something more. You are already part of it. The voice was familiar yet alien, a strange mixture of a comfort and a threat. Emma was the next to succumb. She stopped speaking to the others, her eyes wide and unblinking. She had found something in the deepest part of the facility, an organism, a mass of writhing flesh that seemed to be alive, pulsating with a rhythm that mimicked a heartbeat. It was at that moment the team realized, the mutations were not just happening to them, they were happening to the very building itself. The walls, the floors, the equipment, it was all part of the organism. And they were becoming part of it too. The team's sanity was hanging by a thread. The facility had become a maze of living, breathing walls, with corridors that twisted and stretched unnaturally. It was clear now that they weren't just dealing with mutated creatures, the entire place had transformed into a sentient being, feeding off their fears, their mutations. Karen, driven by the voice in her head, tried to make contact with the heart of the mutation. She found herself drawn to the central chamber, where the mutation seemed to pulse with life. The walls were covered in fleshy tendrils, and in the center, a massive, grotesque creature, half human, half something else, loomed. Emma had already joined it. Her body was now a part of the creature, her mind lost to the mutation. Alex, too, was changing, his body contorting in unnatural ways, his screams muffled by the walls. Karen could feel the transformation inside her. Her skin was crawling, her veins pulsing with a dark energy she couldn't control. The mutation was winning. In the final moments, Karen understood the truth, the mutation had never been an experiment. It was a living, sentient force, an entity that existed not just within the building, but within them. They had become vessels for it, part of its growing mass. And as the last bit of humanity drained from her, she realized with a shock that the mutation was not just physical. It was a part of her mind, her soul. The building was alive, and it was waiting for more. No one ever found the team. The research facility was discovered months later, abandoned once again, with no sign of the scientists. But those who dared to enter the ruins of the facility reported strange occurrences, whispers in the walls, shadows that moved, and flickers of monstrous figures in the corners of their eyes. And in the deepest part of the facility, the mutation waits, its form growing, evolving, watching, waiting for the next unlucky soul to stumble upon its lair.